The silence of saints was about to break. Commander Eva Rostova watched the Kestrel Nebula bleed across the main view screen of the survey vessel Pathfinder. It was a bruise of cosmic dust and nascent starlight, beautiful and utterly indifferent. Her job was to chart gravitational anomalies, not chase legends. Yet the signal that had drawn them here was neither gravity nor starlight. It hummed a quiet tune on the edge of known physics, a perfect repeating chord that no natural phenomenon could compose. Her fingers traced the cool metal of the command chair's armrest, the ship's vibrations, a familiar comfort against the unknown. The stakes were simple: claim whatever was making that sound for the Coalition, or watch a rival snatch a piece of history. Deep within the nebula's heart, something slept. On long-range spectrographs, it resolved into an impossible shape, a lattice of crystalline structures and obsidian armor that absorbed 99% of all incident light. It looked less like a ship and more like a cathedral dedicated to a forgotten god of geometry. This sleeping titan was the source of the chime, a whisper from an age when humanity had built miracles and monsters with equal fervor. Its passive sensor arrays, though dormant for millennia, were etched with sigils that made the Pathfinder's translation software ache. Field distortion is trending upward. Commander Sensor Chief Lin reported, her voice a calm island in the sea of data scrolling beside her. Whatever that thing is, it's pulling in ambient energy. Is it waking up? Rostova asked, keeping her tone even. The ship's AI Solon answered before Lin could. Its synthesized voice was smooth as polished riverstone. Unlikely. The energy draw is consistent with a low-power maintenance cycle that has been running for approximately 500,000 years. It is not an active response to our presence. The sheer timescale of that statement hung in the recycled air. 500 millennia. Humanity had risen, fallen, and risen again in that time. Its silence was the weight of ages. Commander Executive Officer Kalin interrupted, his gaze fixed on a tactical overlay. We have company. 3 contacts accelerating on an intercept vector. Their energy signatures match the Chorister fleet. Rostova's jaw tightened. The choristers of the final word were not pirates. They were something far more irritating. They were legalistic scavengers, a faction that used twisted interpretations of ancient salvage laws to justify their plundering of historical sites. They arrived with writs and warships cloaking their greed in the veneer of legitimacy. Their arrival was a declaration of intent. A tinny voice dripping with sanctimonious authority crackled over the comms. Coalition vessel Pathfinder, you are trespassing in a designated salvage claim zone. This artifact falls under the pre-collapse mandate of heritage. By the authority of Prelate Orin, we are the designated adjudicators here. Cut your drives and prepare to be boarded. Kalen's knuckles were white where he gripped his console. Adjudicators. They're vultures with lawyers. Commander, our charter gives us priority investigation rights. They know that. Kyle Rostova murmured. This isn't about the law. It's about who has the bigger stick to enforce their reading of it. She looked from the approaching chorister ships to the silent cathedral of a vessel hanging in the void. Solon's voice was devoid of emotion. Their fleet composition consists of 1 Dictum-class cruiser and 2 Censure-class frigates. Their kinetic and energy weapon arrays are charging. They are not asking. The universe held its breath, waiting for a choice. Rostova leaned forward, her reflection a pale ghost against the starfield. Solon, open a channel to the Chorister flagship and bring our point defense cannons online. We're not running. A low-level technician in the civilian sector of Relay Station Epsilon 9 adjusted the gain on her deep space listening post, a hobby she pursued after her shift monitoring cargo traffic. The strange musical hum from the Kestrel Nebula had been her private obsession for weeks. Tonight, however, it was accompanied by the harsh, angry squawks of military-grade transponders. She felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach, a silent witness to a conflict she could not comprehend. The chorister prelate. Orin appeared on the main screen. His face was a mask of smug piety framed by the severe high-collared robes of his order. Commander Rostova, I had hoped you would see reason. The artifact which our archives name the Anchor of Saints is a relic of the First Law. It requires stewards who understand its doctrinal importance, not curious academics. Your archives are stolen data fragments, Prelate Rostova countered, her voice cold. And your stewardship is a crowbar applied to history's tombs. The Coalition acknowledges your claim is baseless. Withdraw. This was the first move in a deadly game. Orin's smile didn't reach his eyes. The law is a shield for the righteous, Commander. For others, it is a cage. You have been warned. The channel closed abruptly. Energy spikes from the chorister vessels, Kalen announced, his voice grim. They're deploying kinetic slugs, evasive maneuvers, Rostova ordered. Solon, I need to know what that ship is. Cross-reference its sigils with every database we have. First Federation, Old Empire, the Diaspora Archives. Everything. Processing, the AI replied. Initial matches are sparse. The iconography is associated with the Auditor-class vessels. Records are heavily corrupted. They were not warships in a conventional sense. They were arbiters. The relic taught a lesson just by existing. As the Pathfinder shuddered from a near miss, a new tone echoed from the ancient ship. It was no longer a quiet hum, but a clear, resonant chime that vibrated through the hull. Light bloomed across the obsidian latticework, tracing patterns that had been dark for 500,000 years. The artifact was responding not to the chorister's aggression, but to Rostova's query. Commander, I'm getting something. Lynn exclaimed, her eyes wide. It's not a standard communication. It's a data packet of immense complexity. A query. Solon's synthesized voice filled the bridge, translating the core of the transmission. It presents a hypothetical scenario, a test of judgment. The Saint ship was not waking to fight. It was waking to ask a question. The problem unfolded across their systems, not in words, but in pure, unadorned logic. It described a system with 3 sentient species, 1 native, 1 colonist, and 1 synthetic. A star was failing, and an evacuation vessel could only save 2 of the 3 populations. The query was simple and impossible. Provide the calculus for the choice. Justify the ledger. It's a test of worthiness, Rostova whispered, understanding dawning. The keys to this kingdom were not brute force. The choristers were receiving the same query. Their response was immediate and arrogant. They broadcast back pages of their legalistic scripture, citing their own preordained right to rule and their mandate to preserve artifacts above all else. Their answer was a declaration that they were the most important party in any equation. They had failed the test before it had even begun. Solon, what is the logical course of action? Rostova asked, her mind racing. Pure calculus. The calculus is flawed, the AI stated without hesitation. The scenario presupposes a zero-sum outcome. The optimal solution is to reject the premise. The data provided indicates the evacuation vessel has adaptable fabrication facilities, and the system contains sufficient raw materials to construct a secondary, slower vessel. All 3 species can be saved, albeit at a higher resource cost, and with a delayed timeline for 1 group. It was a mirror to their own intentions. Rostova felt a surge of adrenaline that was part fear, part exhilaration. It was a trick question. The auditor wasn't asking for an answer. It was asking for a way of thinking. It was a test for tyrants, weeding out those who would sacrifice others for their own convenience. They want to see our work, she said. They don't want the answer. They want the reasoning. Broadcast our entire analysis, Solon, Rostova commanded. Include the dissenting opinions, the ethical subroutines, and the resource cost models. Show it everything. Show it how we think. Commander Kalen warned that's tactically sensitive information. The choristers are about to blow us out of the sky, Kale. Our tactical secrets don't matter if we're vapor. This is the only move we have left. The universe does not reward the timid. A stream of pure data, the unfiltered debate between a human commander and her AI companion, flowed from the Pathfinder to the ancient arbiter. It was a messy, contradictory, and deeply compassionate argument. It acknowledged loss, calculated risk, and ultimately refused to accept the easy, brutal answer. For a long moment, the nebula was silent, save for the whistle of incoming chorister munitions. The Pathfinder's shields flared, glowing under the assault. The hull groaned, and a conduit on the engineering deck burst in a shower of sparks, wounding 2 crew members with minor burns. The cost of this conversation was being paid in real time. Then the auditor moved. It did not power up weapons. It did not raise shields. Instead, a wave of pure energy, impossibly coherent, radiated from its core. It wasn't an attack. It was a statement. The kinetic slugs fired by the choristers slowed, tumbled, and then stopped dead in space, held motionless by a localized distortion of space-time. The law of motion had just been overruled. Light, stark, and brilliant raced across the auditor's hull. Systems that had slept since the dawn of interstellar humanity came online with the silent grace of a predator. The vessel was orders of magnitude larger than their sensors had first estimated its true size, hidden by stealth systems that were now disengaging. It was a city of judgment, and it had chosen its steward. Chorister weapons have been neutralized. Solon reported, its voice holding what might have been a ghost of surprise. The artifact has established a direct neural link with my core systems. It designates you, Commander Rostova, as Steward Temporal, Prelate. Oren's face reappeared on the screen, his smugness replaced by a livid fury. This is blasphemy. That relic belongs to the final word. You have no right. It appears the relic disagrees, Rostova said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She could feel it now, a faint presence in the back of her mind. The consciousness of the auditor. A vast and ancient intelligence not speaking in words, but in concepts of balance, precedent, and consequence. The ledger had been opened. The auditor is now under coalition protection, Prelate Rostova declared. And you are in violation of its space. Withdraw or be held in contempt. Oren's fleet, for all its bluster, was now facing a power that had just suspended physics as a polite suggestion. The prelate's face contorted in a snarl of hatred. The word will not be silenced. This is not over. His ships turned, their drives flaring as they retreated into the swirling dust of the nebula. They were not defeated, merely deterred. They would be back. The conflict triangle had been drawn. Commander Lin said, her voice awestruck as she stared at her console. The energy readings from this ship, they're off the scale. Its primary power source isn't a reactor. It's a stable singularity contained within a temporal field. The technology it's a religion unto itself. Rostova stood walking toward the main view screen until her breath misted the armored glass. The auditor filled the entire frame, a monument of silent power. Its central spire glowed with a soft internal light, and along its flanks, what she had thought were decorative sigils were resolving into vast, kilometers-long structures. They remembered every cost and counted every soul. Solon, what is our status? She asked, her voice quiet. The Pathfinder has sustained minor hull damage, and our shield emitters are operating at 73% efficiency, the AI replied. The Auditor, however, is operating at 100%. It awaits your direction, Steward Temporal. Rostova looked at the reflection in the glass. It was her face, but it felt like she was looking at a stranger, a woman who had just inherited a ghost from a forgotten age. She had come here as a scientist, a diplomat. Now she was the caretaker of a power that could rewrite the laws of the universe on a whim. The doubt that had plagued her was gone, replaced by a terrifying, profound sense of responsibility. Her arc from scholar to steward was complete, and its first test was upon her. This was a weapon that taught by example. She knew the choristers would not simply vanish. Their retreat was a strategic repositioning. They would rally their fleet, appeal to their allies, and return with greater force, their legal writs replaced by plasma cannons and torpedoes. They wanted the Auditor not just for its power, but for the legitimacy it would grant their twisted ideology. The first escalation was over, but the war for precedent had just begun. A dock worker on the orbital ring of a nearby colony world, Xylos, paused his cargo loader. He looked up at the sky where the Kestrel Nebula was a familiar faint smudge. Tonight, a new star seemed to shine within it, a tiny, brilliant pinprick of white light. He wondered for a moment what it was, then shrugged and returned to his work, unaware, though, that the fate of his world might soon depend on the decisions made in the heart of that distant glow. Kale, get a full damage report and prioritize repairs to the shield grid. Rostova ordered, turning back to the command deck. Lynn, I want you to interface with the Auditor's sensor logs. I need to know what it has seen while it was sleeping. Solon, begin a deep core analysis of the Chorister fleet's capabilities. I need to know how they think, how they fight, and what they fear. Her crew, galvanized by the impossible events they had just witnessed, moved with crisp efficiency. The bridge of the Pathfinder was no longer a simple survey vessel's command center. It was the impromptu heart of a power beyond their comprehension. The machine was a mirror for the soul of its master. The link in Rostova's mind with the ancient ship clarified. It was not a voice. It was a flow of information, a perfect record of causality. It showed her the Chorister ships retreating, their engines running hot with haste. But it also showed her their destination, a secret staging ground hidden within the Dyson Ring ruins at the edge of the system. They were not just running, they were preparing a trap. The Dyson Ring, a relic of a different, even more ancient civilization, was a graveyard of technology and a maze of gravitational hazards. It was the perfect place for an ambush. The Choristers would use the ring's massive structure to mask their approach and flank any pursuing force. They're heading for the Dyson Ring, Rostova announced. They plan to use it as a staging area to launch a full-scale assault. Kalen's face hardened. It's a smart tactical move. The ring's interference will play havoc with our sensors. We'd be flying in blind. Not entirely blind, Rostova said, a new confidence in her voice. The Auditor was not just a ship. It was a sensory organ of unimaginable fidelity. It didn't just see. It perceived the universe as an unbroken chain of cause and effect. The past was a weapon if you knew how to read it. The Auditor can track their path through the ring's wreckage, she explained. It can see the gravitational wakes, the heat trails, the echoes of their passage. We won't be blind. We will see everything. Solon's optical sensor on the main console glowed softly. Commander, the Choristers believe we will follow them directly. Their strategy is predicated on our adherence to conventional pursuit vectors. This presents an opportunity for a creative application of jurisprudence. Rostova looked at the AI. What are you suggesting, Solon? The Auditor is not merely a weapon or a shield. The AI explained its link to the ancient ship, feeding it tactical possibilities that were as much legal arguments as they were battle plans. It is a system of enforcement. The Choristers have committed an act of unwarranted aggression. The Auditor can now issue a counter-writ, a judgment. This was the core of its being, justice, not victory. What kind of judgment? Kalen asked, skeptical. The Dyson Ring is unstable, Solon continued. Its internal mechanisms are failing, creating pockets of extreme gravitational and temporal stress. The Choristers are navigating a careful path through this dangerous environment. The Auditor possesses the ability to subtly manipulate these instabilities. It can turn their safe path into a cage. It was a gambit of breathtaking elegance and terrifying power. It wasn't about destroying the enemy. It was about using their own choices, their own momentum against them. It was turning their own strategy into the bars of their prison. The ledger always balanced one way or another. Rostova considered the plan. It was audacious. It was precise. and it was lawful in a cosmic sense of the word. The choristers had chosen their path. The auditor would simply ensure they walked it to its logical conclusion. This was the teaching, the first lawful act of the newly awakened saintship. It would teach them that actions have consequences. "Lynn, can you model the gravitational effects Solon is describing?" Rostova asked. Lynn's fingers flew across her console. A three-dimensional map of the Dyson ring appeared on the main screen, a broken halo of incomprehensible scale. The chorister fleet was a trio of red icons, slipping between shattered continents of metal and conduits as wide as moons. As she inputted the auditor's projected influence, a web of blue lines appeared, showing how the very fabric of space within the ring could be warped. It's possible Lynn breathed her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. With the auditor's energy output, we could create a series of cascading gravitational wells. It wouldn't crush them. It would corral them, guide them. Right into a contained, stable orbit inside one of the ring's non-functional transport hubs. Trapped, Kalen finished, a slow grin spreading across his face. Helpless, without a shot fired. "Not without a cost," Solon interjected. "Executing this maneuver will require the auditor to channel a significant portion of its power reserves into its space-time manipulators. This will leave its own defensive systems temporarily weakened. Should the choristers have unexpected reinforcements, or a weapon capable of disrupting the containment field, we would be vulnerable." This was the second escalation. The plan was brilliant, but it came with a tangible risk. If they failed, they would be exposed at the heart of the enemy's chosen battlefield. "Every judgment requires the judge to be judged." Rostova looked at her crew. She saw the strain, the fear, but also the resolute determination. They had been thrust into the center of a conflict that would define an era. They had become the custodians of a power that operated on principles they were only just beginning to understand. "The choristers operate on the belief that might makes right," Rostova said, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "They use the law as a club to beat others into submission. Today we teach them what the law actually is. It's not a weapon. It's a mirror." She turned to the view screen, addressing the silent, waiting intelligence of the ship that was now bound to her. "Solon, plot the course. Execute the judgment." The great machine answered with a surge of power that felt like the drawing of a deep cosmic breath. The Pathfinder, still docked with the ancient vessel, was carried along as the auditor began to move. It did not accelerate with the brute force of thrusters. It simply went. The stars did not streak past. They shifted, as if space itself was making way for the arbiter's passage. The saintship moved not through space, but through consequence. As they approached the shattered majesty of the Dyson ring, Rostova felt the auditor's senses become her own. She saw the ring not as a field of debris, but as a web of interlocking forces. She saw the heat of the chorister engines, the faint radiation shed by their weapon systems, the precise, predictable line of their flight path. They were so confident in their trap, so certain of their superiority. They were a line item waiting for reconciliation. The auditor did not enter the ring. It remained outside, a silent observer from a throne of starlight. From its central spire, a beam of energy invisible to the naked eye lanced out and struck a key structural node of the ruined megastructure. It was not a destructive blast. It was a precise application of force, a resonant frequency that vibrated through the ancient metal. The first domino had been pushed. Deep within the ring, a containment field that had been stable for eons wavered. A gravitational stress point, which the choristers had carefully plotted a course around, began to shift. Their navigator, a stern-faced woman with a penchant for absolute certainty, saw the anomaly on her screen. She barked a course correction, her confidence unshaken. It was just another ghost in the machine, a common occurrence in the Dyson ring. But the new course led them directly toward a second, newly formed instability. Like a masterful shepherd guiding a stubborn flock, The auditor used imperceptible nudges to the system's delicate balance to steer the chorister fleet. It did not attack them. It simply closed off all their escape routes one by one. Every evasive maneuver they made, every clever shortcut they took, only led them deeper into the maze. Their own expertise had become their undoing. On the bridge of the chorister cruiser, Prelate Orin watched his tactical display with growing unease. Their path through the ring was supposed to be clear. Now it was a constantly shifting labyrinth of gravitational hazards. His navigator was sweating her calm, replaced by a frantic, desperate energy. "This is not random," Orin snarled. "They're manipulating the ring. They're hurting us." His second-in-command, a brutish man named Valerius, scoffed. "Impossible. No ship has that kind of power. It's the ring itself. It's always been unstable." But Orin knew better. He could feel the cold, calculating intelligence behind their predicament. It was the same implacable will that had denied him his prize. It was the judgment of the Saint ship. The walls of their own making were closing in. A final powerful pulse from the auditor sealed the trap. A massive section of the ring kilometers long shifted its position, its ancient gravitic stabilizers flaring to life for a few brief moments. The maneuver closed the last exit from the vast hollow chamber the choristers now found themselves in. A containment field, designed to hold materials for stellar engineering, flickered into existence around them, powered by the ring's own failing systems. They were boxed in. Their weapons were useless against the sheer scale of their prison. Their engines could thrust for 1,000 years, and they would not escape. Their sentence had been delivered. On the Pathfinder, the bridge crew watched in stunned silence. There had been no explosion, no violence, no visceral clash of arms. There had only been a perfect, inescapable execution of a plan that was half battle tactic, half legal ruling. "They are contained," Solon announced. "Their communications are being jammed by the ring's interference. They are isolated. The judgment is complete." The auditor had not destroyed them. It had removed them from the board. It had held them in contempt. This Rostova realized was the nature of its power. It did not seek to annihilate. It sought to correct. It remembered by ledgers, never by callers. A message suddenly appeared on their comms, bypassing all their encryption. It was from an unknown source, a civilian frequency from the nearby colony of Xylos. The face on the screen was the young woman from the listening post, her expression a mixture of terror and awe. "We saw it," she stammered, her voice trembling. "We saw the whole thing on our gravimetric scanners. You caged them. You used the ring like a key in a lock." "Who are you?" Rostova looked at the young, hopeful face and understood the third escalation was upon them. Their actions had been witnessed. The secret of the auditor was out. A new precedent for galactic law had just been set, not in a courtroom, but in the heart of a dying star system. The galaxy would learn of the ship that taught its lessons with the quiet, inexorable force of consequence itself. Her responsibility was no longer just to the ship, but to the hope it now represented. Rostova took a breath, her mind a nexus between the quiet efficiency of the Pathfinder's bridge and the vast, silent consciousness of the ship she now commanded. The young woman from Xylos, her face a mix of fear and wonder, was a symbol of the new reality. Every action they took was now on a galactic stage. She keyed her comms, her voice broadcasting not just to the listening post, but on an open channel for any who might be listening. "This is Commander Eva Rostova of the Coalition survey vessel Pathfinder. We have taken protective stewardship of a First Federation artifact. Its purpose is to ensure the lawful and peaceful resolution of disputes. The actions you witnessed were a defensive measure carried out according to its core principles." Her message was a carefully worded declaration of precedent. "What do we do now?" Commander Kalen asked, his earlier excitement tempered by the gravity of their situation. "We have a fleet of religious zealots in a box, but their friends are out there. And now the whole sector knows we're here. The auditor's containment field is self-sustaining, powered by the ring's ambient energy. Solon reported its voice a calm counterpoint to the tension. However, the maneuver has left the auditor's primary energy reserves at 62%. Its defensive capabilities are correspondingly reduced. We are for the moment vulnerable. This was the tangible cost of their elegant victory. They had won the first round, not with a fist, but with a perfectly executed legal argument backed by physics. But now they were exposed their momentary weakness, a beacon for any who would challenge their claim. True power is not a weapon, but a burden. We hold our position, Rostova commanded. Lin, I want every sensor we have focused on deep space. I want to know the moment a housefly jumps a system away. Kyle, get our own repair crews working double time. I want the Pathfinder ready to move at a moment's notice. And Solon, continue your dialogue with the auditor. I need to understand its full capabilities, its limits, its laws. The AI's optical sensor pulsed. It is already teaching me, Commander. It teaches by numbers a perfect and unending stream of causality. Its memory is a ledger of every action and reaction it has ever witnessed. It confirms the choristers have sent a distress call, a plea for reinforcements, laced with a legalistic manifesto, painting you as a rogue agent who has commandeered a weapon of mass destruction. The enemy was changing the terms of the fight. Deep within the trapped chorister cruiser, Prelate Oren slammed his fist against a console. The containment field was a shimmering, inescapable wall outside his viewports, the star-dusted metal of the Dyson ring, a constant reminder of his humiliation. His distress call was a scream of righteous fury sent out into the void, a demand for the entire order of the final word to descend upon this system and reclaim what was theirs. He was a martyr in his own mind, a prophet caged by heretics. He would see Rostova burn even if it meant setting the entire nebula ablaze. His faith was a fire that warmed no one. Days passed. The crew of the Pathfinder worked with a quiet, focused intensity. They were no longer surveyors. They were guardians, the first priests of a new and terrifyingly logical church. Rostova spent most of her time in a meditative state, her mind linked with the auditor. She walked its memory bank's vast archives of data that represented not just history, but the mathematical proof of why history had unfolded as it did. She saw civilizations rise and fall not as tragedies, but as equations that had reached their inevitable sum. The universe did not mourn, it simply calculated. She learned the auditor was one of many a fleet of arbiters built to confront an ancient enemy that had weaponized belief itself, a mimetic plague that could turn entire populations into unthinking zealots. The auditors had been designed to combat this plague not by destroying the infected, but by showing them the flawed logic of their faith, by holding up a perfect mirror to their fanaticism. It was a war fought not with kinetics, but with calculus. The choristers were a faint echo of that ancient foe. Commander Lin's voice cut through Rostova's trance. Multiple contacts, Commander. A lot of them. They just jumped in at the system's edge. 25 No-30 ships, all bearing chorister transponders. Rostova's eyes snapped open. She was back on the bridge of the Pathfinder, the cold reality of the present crashing down on her. The main view screen showed a swarm of enemy vessels, a fleet 10 times the size of the one they had trapped. This was not a punitive expedition. This was an invasion. The stakes had just been raised to the system level. They're not heading for us, Kalen observed, his voice tight with tension. They're burning hard for Xylos. A cold dread washed over Rostova. Xylos, the colony, the listening post, the innocent witnesses. It was a classic gambit. Unable to defeat the queen, you attack the pawn. The choristers were going to take a hostage. Their cruelty was as predictable as an orbit. They are broadcasting a system-wide ultimatum. Solon announced, its voice grim. The face of a new prelate, a stern older woman with eyes like chips of flint, filled the screen. She stood on the bridge of a massive chorister dreadnought, the final argument. To the rogue agent Rostova, the woman's voice boomed. "You have stolen a holy relic and imprisoned our brethren. This is an act of war against the final word. We do not recognize your authority or your claim. We are now invoking the mandate of heritage upon the colony of Xylos. Their world, their resources, their very lives are now forfeit, collateral against the safe return of our people and our property." It was a monstrous perversion of law. They were declaring an entire civilian population to be nothing more than a bargaining chip. A family having dinner in a small apartment on Xylos watched the broadcast, the food growing cold on their plates. The father held his daughter's hand, his knuckles white. The mother stared at the face of the chorister prelate, her heart pounding with a fear she had never known. They were just ordinary people caught in a war of gods and monsters they couldn't possibly understand. "They aren't bluffing," Rostova said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "They'll burn that world to prove a point. Our options are limited." Solon calculated. A direct assault on their fleet would be unwise. The Auditor's power reserves are still not at 100%. While we could likely prevail, the cost in collateral damage to Xylos would be unacceptable. Furthermore, engaging them in conventional warfare would be a violation of the Auditor's primary doctrine. It would be a confession that its methods have failed. To win by force would be to lose by principle. "So we can't fight them head-on," Kalen said, frustration etched on his face. "We can't let them hold Xylos hostage. What in the hell can we do?" Rostova's mind raced, sifting through the countless precedents and logical proofs she had absorbed from the Auditor. The ancient ship was not a weapon, it was an argument. And you did not win an argument by shouting louder. You won by making a better point. The choristers were using the law as a shield for their brutality. The Auditor had to use it as a lens to show that brutality for what it truly was. The mirror had to be turned upon their souls. "They've made a fatal mistake," Rostova said, a flicker of an idea taking root. "They have invoked the law. They have wrapped themselves in the language of mandates and forfeitures. They've invited a legal debate." "A debate while they hold a gun to a planet's head?" Kalen retorted. "Exactly," Rostova confirmed. "They think it's a gun. We have to show them it's a mirror. Solon the Auditor showed me its purpose. It was built to fight mimetic plagues, to deconstruct faith-based zealotry with irrefutable logic. Can it do that again? Not just to one ship, but to a fleet." The AI was silent for a long moment, processing the audacious request. "The concept is sound. The Auditor does not merely see the past, it calculates the future. It can project a full sensory simulation of cause and effect, a causal chain reaction directly into the minds of every crew member on that fleet. It can show them the consequences of their actions, not as a possibility, but as a mathematical certainty." This was the ultimate expression of its power. "It would not be a pleasant experience," Solon continued. "It would force them to live through the logical endpoint of their ideology. The destruction of Xylos, the galactic condemnation, the civil war that would erupt within their own faction when their methods are exposed, the eventual lonely heat death of their beliefs in a universe that values balance over zealotry. It would be an enforced enlightenment. It was a weapon that killed ideas, not people. The cost, Rostova asked, already knowing the answer. "It would require nearly all of the Auditor's remaining power," the AI confirmed. "For several minutes, we would be utterly defenseless. If even a fraction of their fleet can resist the projection and fire, we will not survive." This was the final escalation, the ultimate gambit. They would bare their throat to the enemy, in the hope that the enemy would, upon seeing its own reflection, choose not to bite. It was a terrifying, beautiful, and utterly insane plan. The truest faith is a wager on the nature of others. "Do it," Rostova said, her decision absolute. "Prepare the causal ledger." broadcast it to their entire fleet, and open a channel to the chorister prelate. I want her to see my face when her world comes apart." The auditor shuddered as it began to gather its power. Energy flowed from 1,000 sleeping systems converging on the central spire. The light within it grew from a soft glow to a blinding silent star. The ship was focusing its entire being on a single non-violent act, an act of pure, undeniable truth. The time for counting was over. It was time to show the sum. On the bridge of the final argument, the new prelate, whose name was Kira, watched the auditor with contempt. The coalition ship was hailing her. She accepted the channel, eager to hear their pleas for mercy. Rostova's face appeared before her, calm and resolute. "Prelate." Kira Rostova began, her voice echoing across the bridges of 30 warships. "You have cited the law. You have made your claim. Now you will bear witness to the ledger." Before Kira could respond, it began. It was not a sound or a light. It was an idea inserted directly into the mind of every man and woman in the chorister fleet. A perfect, vivid, and inescapable vision of the future they were choosing to create. They saw the orbital bombardment of Xylos. They felt the heat, heard the screams, choked on the dust of falling cities. They saw the faces of the dead, the vacant eyes of orphaned children. But it did not stop there. The ledger was thorough. They saw the aftermath, the fury of the coalition, the splintering of their own order as moderate factions recoiled in horror at their barbarism. They saw their allies abandon them, their trade routes severed, their homeworlds blockaded. They experienced the slow, grinding poverty and civil strife that followed. They lived through decades of infighting, of purges and counter-purges, their grand faith collapsing into a squabbling, pathetic cult. They saw the names of their own children cursed in the history books. The vision was a mirror that showed not their face but the legacy of their choices. On the bridge of the final argument, Kira staggered back, her hands clutching her head. She saw her own future, a lonely old woman on a dying world, hated by her own people, her life's work a monument to failure. She saw that her righteous cause was nothing but a path to ruin. The certainty that had been the bedrock of her soul cracked, shattered, and turned to dust. Valerius, the brutish second-in-command from the trapped fleet, saw his home village incinerated in one of the schism wars. The faces of his family, twisted in agony, were burned into his mind. The conviction that might makes right dissolved into the bitter acid of personal loss. Across the fleet, the effect was the same. Gunners turned away from their targeting consoles, weeping. Navigators stared blankly into space, their flight paths forgotten. Captains slumped in their command chairs, the weight of a future they had not understood crushing them. Their zeal was a hollow thing, and the auditor had filled that hollowness with the terrible gravity of truth. The ledger had been shown, and it demanded to be balanced. The attack never came. The chorister fleet, once a unified instrument of righteous fury, was now 30 ships crewed by broken, disillusioned souls. A few like Kira were so shattered by the revelation that they were catatonic. Others, their faith completely inverted, began broadcasting confessions, apologies, renunciations of the final word. The fleet was not defeated. It had ceased to exist as a coherent entity. A war had been won by breaking an idea. Rostova watched the chaos unfold, her body trembling with the strain of the ordeal. The auditor was silent, its inner light dimmed to a faint ember. Its power reserves were almost completely drained. They had been vulnerable, but the enemy had been unable to strike. Their weapon had been their own conscience. A victory without a single casualty, a cost paid only in certainty. "It is done," Solon stated, its voice quiet. "The chorister fleet is neutralized. Multiple ships are surrendering, not to us, but to the concept of law they now understand. Prelate Oren's trapped fleet is petitioning for amnesty." The coalition arrived a day later, not as a relief force, but as a host of astonished witnesses. They found a fleet of repentant zealots and a single silent saint ship that had pacified an army with a thought. The story of the Kestrel Nebula of the Auditor and its steward temporal spread through the galaxy like a cleansing fire. The Rostova Doctrine was formally adopted into coalition law. Relics of the First Federation's Auditor class were not to be salvaged or weaponized. They were to be stewarded, their judgments respected, their lessons studied. A new age of law had begun, one based not on the threat of force, but on the undeniable truth of consequence. The Auditor had not just saved a world. It had taught the galaxy a new way to think. Rostova stood on the bridge of the Pathfinder, looking out at the great silent ship that was now her charge. The link in her mind was quiet. The ancient intelligence resting its great work done for now. Kaylin and Lynn stood beside her, their faces filled with a quiet awe that she knew would never fade. They had not just discovered history, they had become part of it. On the main console of the Auditor, deep within its processing core, where no human eye would ever see, a single line of code blinked into existence on an ethereal ledger. It read, Case 734, hostilities ceased, precedent established, ledger balanced. As the entry settled, the massive space-time arrays along the ship's hull, now cold and dormant, vented a whisper of residual energy, a faint shimmering aurora that danced for a moment against the black. I came here to chart the stars, not to carry the weight of them. This power, this truth is not a gift. It is a question, and every day for the rest of my life, my crew and I will have to find the answer. We are not conquerors. We are not even soldiers anymore. We are librarians of consequence, caretakers of the greatest, most terrible mirror the galaxy has ever known. And we must pray we are worthy of what it shows us. The age of the Arbiter had begun.